I have show and tell for you today. And that, I have this. I'm going to tell you about it here in a minute. Who here still stops to pick up change if it's on the ground and you find it? You know, my kids won't even do it. They're like, oh, leave it there. It's a dime. Leave it alone. I'm like, no! That's money, man! Do you remember when you were a kid? Do you remember if you might be like going to the store or something, or you might just be walking with your friends or with your family, and you look down and there would be a dime? Or a nickel, or even a penny? What if it was a quarter? Oh my gosh. Now you're rich, right? Yeah. Candy bar. Or two. Like, you wouldn't just walk by money sitting on the road, would you? When you were a kid? No way, man. It didn't take much to make us happy when we were kids. A dime or a nickel, we found it. You know, when I got in my 40s and had a little more stuff in life, I thought about that. I would walk by and change. I'd be like, ah. And then I got superstitious. Then I was like, you know what? God really gave me some stuff in life. What am I telling God if I just walk by a nickel? I'm telling God I'm too rich. Don't give me anything else, God. So I started picking everything up whenever I'd see it. Out of superstition, you know. That's how crazy it is up here in my head, right? But I still pick up change, right? I don't know if it's for the right reasons or not, but I do. In fact, this quarter I found yesterday in a parking lot. If it's yours, I'm sorry. That's mine now. Sometimes I'll leave it thinking, well, somebody else might want it. But it's not because I'm too good to pick up change, I can tell you that. So today's text is all about, are we too proud or too humble? That's kind of the dynamic going on in today's text. Are we too proud or are we too humble? And it's told, you have to understand our story today through the lens or the context of a first century Palestinian wedding banquet. In that time and in that place, the culture was such that if you were invited to a wedding, you went and you sat yourself. But the most important people got the middle seat, the closest seat, the seat right in the middle. That's where the most important people went or got a seat. So you might come in and you might sit down, just not thinking too much about it. And then your host might come around and say, listen, sorry, that's not for you. You're not quite important. They wouldn't say it, but you felt it. I remember that this was a culture built on shame and honor. Imagine the shame of having to get up and slink off to a lower seat, you know. Oh my gosh. Anybody have a wedding recently in their families? If you haven't, it won't be long. It goes faster than you think, parents. But I think the hardest thing now for wedding and for planning weddings is the seating chart at the reception. Who gets to sit with who? Who has to sit where? I don't really ever care. Well, that's not true. I'll tell you where the priest gets set. The priest goes with the oddball relatives, the ones that you don't want to put with anything. That's who they put us with. If you get old crazy Uncle Joe or Aunt Mary, and it's a long afternoon, I can tell you. But what I really care about, if I'm not the priest I'm invited, is am I close to the buffet? Who gets called to the buffet first? That's what I care about. That's not their concern, but that is my concern. But it's where are you seated at these events? We don't really seat them by importance. But if you go to a concert, say, if you buy the less expensive tickets, where are you? Beep. Way up, man. Maybe behind or a sporting event. You know, and if you buy the more expensive tickets, where are you? Front and center. Yes. Anybody see an NBA game on television or in person recently? There are people that sit, they just don't sell the seats, they sell chairs on the floor, right? Who sits there? Super important people, super rich people, rap stars, movie stars, billionaires, you know? And in that kind of event, maybe it's still the same in things we go to, maybe it was this back then. It's as important to be seen as it is to see. So it's kind of about that. Status. So Jesus reminds us today, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. Kind of keep your ego right-sized. Don't think you're better than you ought to be. He talks about it in terms of grace and disgrace. He talks about it in terms of honor and shame. He talks about it in terms of humility and humiliation. He talks about it in terms of healthy ego, or as one book I read tells me, self-will run riot. I love that phrase. Self-will run riot. A couple of years ago, several years ago, one of my children, grown children, gave me a birthday card. And I thought it was so great that I cut off the front and I framed it and I keep it in my bathroom as a reminder of what I think relates to this topic. This is a pickle. It's a big green pickle, and it's a guy, pickle guy. He's got little legs and his eyes are sort of like this. And he's saying, here's what he's saying. He's saying, I'm kind of a big deal. And I keep that in my bathroom because I always want to remember when I get up in the morning that my default position is to think I'm a bigger deal than I really am. Right? And I always need, and I think it represents sort of that perfect sense of self-awareness, modesty in a sense. Not false humility, but the right amount of humility. Now, when in Luke's Gospel, the 14th chapter, which is what we're in today, when Jesus talks about these weddings, he gives a long story after what we heard today about another wedding banquet. This is one he talks about. He says a person gave a wedding and invited all the important people, their friends. And when it came time for the banquet, nobody showed up. None of the invited people showed up. And so the person giving the wedding says, listen, they came and told him, say, hey, listen, nobody came. Sorry to tell you this, but the banquet hall is empty. And he says, listen, I'll tell you what, forget about those friends of mine, forget about those important people. Go out and get anybody who will come. Go out and tell everybody in the streets, we're going to fill this darn place up. And in fact, that's what they do. And here's the point that Jesus is making. Imagine Jesus coming to earth, inviting us, and us saying, nah, I'm too busy. I'm too rich. I'm too proud. I'm too humble. Do you think Jesus knew he was the Son of God? I do. You can think about it in different ways, but I think so. And in John's Gospel, it says it a couple of times, real early on, it says, let me find this, John 1, I think it's 1:11. Look, I act like I know. Oh, yes, I know exactly. John 1:11 says, it's on my paper here. I did look it up before, but I'm just saying, I'm not that smart. John 1:11, he says, he came to that which was his own, talking about Jesus. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. That's what it says right away in John's Gospel. He came to his own, that's us, and his own, that's us, did not receive him. And then a little later, in the 10th chapter of John, 10:10, says, I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. Jesus knew that he was coming to his people, that's us, to give us life, to give us abundant life, and to teach us what abundant life looks like. And did we receive it? Are we receiving it? Are you receiving it? You know? We have been invited into God's life of abundance, God's kingdom life. And I'm not talking, see, people get superstitious about money too, and they're like, oh, listen, I got to give 10% to the church, otherwise God won't give me any more money. I won't get a raise. I'll give you $10. I'm sure God's going to send me $100 in the mail. You've heard this. Prosperity gospel, maybe? There's other names for it. That's just superstition. You should give generously because that's what God calls you to do. You don't give because God's going to give you something back, I promise you. Give because you're supposed to give. That's why, irrespective. But the point is, we have been called to God's abundant life. Jesus came knowing that he was coming to us. We have been invited. Are we going to God's banquet Are we listening to God's call? Are we even opening God's invitation? Or are we too good for it? Do we think, I got other things to do. I'd like to do that, God, but I got other stuff to do. Sometimes we think we're not good enough. We're too ashamed to ask and receive. Well, neither of those are right. We should be right-sized. Just humble enough to know that we don't deserve, but confident enough to know that we receive. And hungry enough to open the invitation and to go. And you know what? When I go to a wedding, I'm not worried about the seating chart. When I go to God's kingdom, I am not worried about where I'm going to sit. This is the truth. This is true. I'm not worried about where I'm going to sit. I am truly just happy to be invited. That's the truth. And so this is what I think it means to be a big deal in God's kingdom. I think we have to set aside false humility and set aside pride and humbly accept the invitation to an abundant life lived in Christ. That's what I think.